Okay, great. Thank you very much, Simone. So welcome, everyone. My name is Ruth Wilcox. I'm Professor of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Leeds, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar, which is all about our EPSRC place-based impact acceleration accounts. And in particular, today we're going to be focusing on guiding you through the proof of concept applications. Now I can't make the slides go on. Okay. We are recording today's session, and that will be available afterwards if you want to take another listen through. And we will be having a Q&A session at the end. If you want to, or if you think of any questions during the presentations, then please do use the chat box, and we'll address those questions at the end. So the agenda for today is that I'm going to give a quick overview of the PBIAA funding opportunity itself and just explain a little bit about the proof of concept applications. And I'm going to pass over to Graeme Howling from Medipex, who's been supporting quite a number of our applications in the past, who's going to be talking through some considerations for writing a strong proof of concept application. And then we've got two presentations from current grant holders, Christoph, Walti and Alison Jones, who are going to be talking through their applications and some of the insights from their success. And then, as I said, we'll finish with a question and answer session, which Simone is going to help. You've perhaps just already met Simone. She's our PBIAA operations manager. So first, just a little bit about the scheme. So it's an EPSRC scheme. It works in a similar way to the impact acceleration accounts that you might be aware of that universities are awarded. But this is particularly focused on the place-based concept. So the aim of the scheme is to accelerate impact from engineering and physical sciences research, but it has to be place-based. So it has to be regionally based around a specific thematic focus, a particular industrial cluster. And the aim is to enhance the capabilities of those clusters across the UK and to drive regional economic growth. So our place-based impact acceleration account is based in the Yorkshire region, and it's all about innovating medical technologies across our region. The funding we received from the EPSRC, which was just over 5 million, we are now packaging into smaller projects and then awarding those. And today's webinar is all about one of those types of projects, which is the proof of concept projects. But there's a suite of different impact projects that you might be aware of. And the point of all of those projects is to support the translation of technologies and in the longer term to support economic growth in our region. So just some overall scope of what we can and can't fund on the scheme for impact projects and in particular for proof of concept projects. So all the funding must be for projects related to medical technologies. And we have a definition of medical technologies that's in the core documents, which is devices, tools and machines used to save and improve people's lives. And just to emphasize that the scope doesn't extend to drugs and biopharmaceuticals, and it doesn't extend to kind of wellness or fitness devices that you could buy on the open market. So it must be very much medically related. The project should be at least 50% within the remit of the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, because they're our funder. If you need to find out a little bit more about what that remit is, there's a fairly clear, that's set out quite clearly on their website. But just to emphasize, it doesn't need to link directly to prior EPSRC funding. So you don't have to have had EPSRC funding to apply for this scheme. And then a critical one is that projects, as I said, must support growth in the Yorkshire region and support the medtech economy in this region. That doesn't mean that you need to be based in a university in this region. If you're not in a university in this region, then there would still need to be evidence that it would particularly support growth in this region. And that would normally be by partnering with a company that is based in this region. to show that your project would have benefit for that company. The projects must be led by a member of academic staff at a UK higher education institute or an NHS institute if it's eligible for EPSRC funding. And if you need help with checking that, we can probably guide you towards some information that would help with that. In terms of what we do when you submit the projects, we then send those out to peer review through academics and members of commercialisation teams at the local universities who will assess different aspects of the applications. And then we convene a panel, which is due to take place in December this year, where we will talk through each of those proposals and rank them. So focusing specifically on the proof of concept projects, in this call, they can be up to £120,000. They're really designed for larger technical development programs to achieve something that's commercially some commercially identified milestones. So to emphasise, they are not for new research, not for the kinds of research projects that you could put into EPSRC or other funders. The support is very much around the translation of that technology. Typically, they would be 12 to 18 months in duration, but that can be flexible and very much co-developed with the end users to demonstrate the technical or the commercial feasibility and prove the concept of the technology that you're working on. Another important point I've highlighted in red, perhaps those points that I think in the past when we've looked at peer reviews have been kind of flagged as being not well evidenced in some proposals. So that's why those ones are particularly flagged. Only projects that have already proved their technical feasibility and market need would be ready at this stage. So you're hopefully aware that we have three forms of funding in the scheme: a proof of market or due diligence at the lowest end of funding, and then a middle zone around proving the technical feasibility. So that could be, for example, developing a prototype and showing that something can be made, and then these larger scale proof of concept projects, which is proving that that concept actually works as anticipated in a situation that represents clinic. We do require you to have both clinical and industrial partners on board, recognising that if the IP is still very much with the university and there is potential for the technology to be spun out through the university, that you might not want an industry partner on board with whom you've got some agreement that they are going to perhaps license the technology if the proof of concept comes off. So we say industrial or industry related partners. So if you haven't got an industry partner on board and you're planning to spin out the technology, in those cases, we'd expect you to have some guidance from a partner. For example, Medipex, Medilink, and there's a number of other partners that can support that kind of industry focus of the application without being a particular company. So either or is fine. And we absolutely expect there to have been input from your technology transfer office or commercialisation office. Different universities have different names for these, but the folks within your university that can really guide you around IP protection, around the routes to commercialisation of your idea. So make sure that you've communicated with them, you've got them on board, and indeed we ask for some details from them in the application. A little reminder there, and we'll pop this back up at the end, the deadline for funding for this current call is the 24th of November. I think that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to go pass on to Graeme, Christoph and Al to then go through in a bit more detail. I think I've maybe seen one or two questions already popping up, so if you do have them, pop them in the chat and we'll either respond in the chat or at the end in the Q&A session. Right, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Graeme now and hope that we can do this smoothly and he can share his screen. Perfect.
That
Over
worked.
to you, Graeme. Brilliant.
Okay. Hi, I'm Graeme Howling. I work for Medipex. I'm head of innovation at Medipex. Medipex is a small healthcare innovation hub, and we support the NHS, universities, and SMEs with their innovation and translation projects. Yeah, it's moving. So yeah, I think Ruth really went over all of this, but PBIEA proof of concept projects will be funded up to £120,000, 12 to 18 months worth of funding, and you need to have previously demonstrated and defined the clinical need, the market opportunity, and the technical feasibility. And as Ruth said, you need to have some sort of clinical input and some sort of commercial partner or commercial support if you're going through to a spin out. To spin out your technology. The applications need to be well structured, have a clear project plan with clear milestones and deliverables, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. It needs to address the technical risk. So the idea of proof of concept projects is that they de-risk the technology, move them along the TRL technology readiness levels, and make it make it more ready for the market. So you need to include a clear development plan and a commercialization plan in your application. And again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And like Ruth said, you need to involve your university TTO or research and innovation support team. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit hoarse and coughing and spluttering a bit. So the common shortcomings of previous POC proposals, the clinical need and the market opportunity wasn't clearly defined. So you need to make sure that you really explain what the clinical need is, what the market opportunity is, and what the anticipated clinical outcomes are. Often applications don't have a really clear intellectual property strategy, so you need to make sure that's clear in the application and you have an understanding of who owns what IP and how that IP will be managed going forward. Obviously, Ruth mentioned about the regional economic benefit. That needs to be clear in your applications as well. It needs to have some sort of benefit to the economic benefit to the Yorkshire region, and often that's not been clearly described in applications in the past. Follow-on plans are important. POC projects don't take your technology to the market. There's often stages after proof of concept that need to be supported. So you need to have a clear plan of those follow-on stages and how those stages are going to be funded. And if that's clearly articulated in your application, then it strengthens the application. It looks like you understand the whole route to market. Commercial partners, we mentioned that. Lack of commercial partners can weaken applications, so you need to have some sort of idea. You may not have already contacted those partners, but it might be part of the POC project where you actually engage with those partners and bring them on to the project. So that's fine, but you need to have some sort of plan in your POC about bringing on commercial partners to support the further development and commercialization. And obviously the project scope. So projects can fall into the trap of being research focused rather than translational. So you need to make sure that your technology is in the right space and is going towards that innovation and translational goals. So we've just mentioned that the PBIEA POC call doesn't fund basic research, so the projects must be translational. They must be progressing the technology towards that commercialization goal, so the higher TRL levels, addressing technical risk, and you must be showing that you're de-risking your technology and taking it further down that those to the higher TRL levels. And one of the things that is really important in these innovation type projects is that if it's going to fail, make sure it's going to fail early. So address the main risks of your technology early in that proof of concept project. So what makes a compelling opportunity and a strong value proposition? So in your POC proposal, you need to clearly describe the unmet clinical need. You need to show the market opportunity, and that's the size and the value for the potential of your technology. And you really need to define a value proposition clearly. So often people are a bit confused about these terminologies. So an unmet clinical need is a gap in medical care where a health condition or a disease lacks effective prevention, diagnosis, or treatment. And a value proposition is a clear statement that explains the unique benefits and value a product, service, or solution offers to its target audience. And that target audience can be patients, clinicians, and the healthcare provider in general. So as part of your POC application and your proposal, you'll need to really describe what the real problem is. So you really need to understand that that unmet clinical need. And one of the ways of doing that is to make sure that you understand the problem is to understand how big the problem is, how widespread the problem is, understand any of the underlying issues of that problem, and are there any existing solutions already on the market, and if so, why are they not satisfying that unmet need? What's their issues and drawbacks and challenges around those existing products and solutions? So how you might do this is to engage with users and stakeholders. You might, if you're developing a surgical tool, you might go into the surgery and watch those relevant surgery those operations and see where those clinicians are having problems and issues, and then obviously your solution hopefully will get over those challenges that the clinician might encounter. So obviously we need you have already done some market research, and that's where the other streams in the PBIEA can come in. So you know ideally you may have already done some proof of market study, so you can show that you really understand the problem and the value and the size of that problem. So another aspect is obviously understand the market, and you need to demonstrate that you really understand the market opportunity for your technology. And this is a quantitative and qualitative assessment of the market, and it defines things like the size of the market, the number of customers, the number of patients, the competition, and the current solutions and their strengths and weaknesses. So it essentially this justifies that your project is worth doing and prevents wasting time, money, and effort on a problem that's just not significant enough to warrant the research required. So I've included this slide about what is the market opportunity. So it's the market size, like I say, it's the number of patients affected, it's the territories where there is clinical need, but also it's about really understanding that market opportunity and stratifying and digging down and understanding the opportunity for your specific technology. So often applications will put a global market size. For example, cancer diagnostics is worth $18 billion, but your technology might only influence a small part of that cancer diagnostics market. For example, you might be developing a breast cancer diagnostic. So you need to really understand where your technology lies and how that has the potential of generating that market size and value. And you might also want to consider other market opportunities. Again, your technology might have multiple opportunities in healthcare, but it's really advisable to have a main focus, but you might also want to say it can also be used in these other areas, and those other areas have, X pounds or X dollars of value. I mentioned about understanding the current products and solutions that are already on the market. This is basically some understanding of the sort of competitor landscape, and you really need to show that you understand what's already being used in healthcare, why your product or your solution is better than what's on the market already, and what additional benefits that your product or solution is offering to healthcare. You might want to also look at how many competitors there are and how they're doing. So it adds strength to your technology if there's a competitor that maybe has an inferior product, but is generating great sales, and it's being used by a lot of people. If your technology is an improvement on that, then you can justify that you might cannibalize that market and get that sort of market share. So moving on to this slide, which is gives you examples of the sort of typical activities that a POC project might have in it. Like we've said, POC is not a research project. POCs generally address the technical risk. So all the basic underpinning research should have already been completed. So these are as a list of examples of work that's within the scope of a POC. So developing a performance specification and essential requirements, developing prototypes, in vitro testing of those prototypes, in vivo preclinical assessments. For example, you may have do some small-scale animal models and animal testing, and then preparation and readiness for clinical studies. So you need to show that your device is safe enough to enter clinical trials, and that can be a part of the POC project. Again, I've mentioned about addressing the highest risk first. Yeah, and that's something that's unique about POC projects. It's advisable to state what your biggest risks are and address those early in the POC project. So as part of the application, you will need to provide a clear project plan. And this needs to be clearly laid out in your application. And technical development is often driven by the risks, the costs, and the complexities and timescales. And uniquely for medical devices and the MedTech solutions, is regulations one of the critical drivers of the technical development for a medical device. So you need to have some sort of consideration of the medical device regulations and have some sort of understanding and really express that within your POC application, that you understand what's required to take your technology through to the market. So it's essential that you have a clear, well-structured project plan. This includes clear milestones, deliverables, decision points, and this plan has to be appropriately resourced and costed. So you need to have realistic timescales and costs included, and you need to show that you have some good risk management and good project management as part of the project. So we're going to move on to the IP section. As part of the POC application, there's a section on IP. So you need to show that you've made some thoughts about IP. You mightn't have a patent in place already, but you need to have an idea of where there's potential for intellectual property, because intellectual property is really important for innovation and translation. It locks in the value to the project and makes projects investable and obviously generates value while preventing others from copying your work. Often in medtech area, people focus on patents, but intellectual property can also cover copyright, design rights, know-how, which is essentially trade secrets, and also can include trademarks. So you need to maybe consider those if patents aren't appropriate at this stage of the project. You might want to include those other types of intellectual property. So in the box, there's a statement. It says, if your colleagues in your organization have spent time, resources, intellect, and effort in developing the ideas, you need to ensure that you've got some sort of plan to protect the IP so that you can retain control and also gain potential rewards from all the hard work that you've done. This slide just gives you a little bit more about patent protection. Essentially, it's an agreement between the state and the inventor, where the inventor publicly shares the scientific advancement for the benefit of society, and in return, the inventor gets protection from others, preventing others from using or copying their innovation for a specified period, which is usually 20 years. You need to have an idea about if your technology has potential to be protected by patent. You need to show that you understand this process, and really, if there's potential for you to patent something, you must keep it completely confidential until at least you've filed that patent application, and it's often good to state that in the POC applications, that you've kept all the information confidential. Excuse me. So, practical considerations for protecting your IP. I've mentioned about confidentiality. You need to keep any of your novel ideas confidential, and that will mean that at a later stage you can protect the IP, you can patent it. Obviously, when you can't do everything yourself, you need to work with others. You need to express how you're going to work with others. So you're going to use some sort of agreements to keep that confidentiality. So this would be confidentiality agreements or collaboration agreements, or if you're bringing in an external contractor to work with you, some sort of contract that maintains the confidentiality. Obviously, you need to explain how you're managing your IP. So there's a section on background and foreground IP. And you need to clearly describe what your IP is or what your potential IP could be while you're doing the POC. And you need to have some sort of intellectual property strategy. So have a clear plan, understand what new IP may arise and how it might be managed, and understand that IP landscape. So again, it's often good to have done some proof of market type study, and that might have included sort of patent searches, freedom to operate type work, so that you understand the patents that are around and that your technology is not potentially going to infringe those patents. So this is my last slide, and then I think hand over to Christoph. But there's a section on follow-on plans. You need to have a clear plan on how will you take your technology towards the market. This might be a spin-out or a license, or it might be both of those options at this point. You need to obviously describe that clearly. You will need to collaborate with people, and you need to describe how you're going to engage with these organizations. You can't do everything yourself. You need to outline a clear development plan. So it might be that your medical device development, you need to do some clinical trials to get it to the higher TRL levels, closer to market. You need to understand the regulatory requirements, and then you need to, that plan might also need to include manufacture and scale up processes and stages downstream from the POC. So for this section on follow-on plans, it's useful to include timescales and predicted costs, have some sort of Gantt chart or project plan, and it doesn't have to be in minute detail, but it's a good idea to show that you've thought about the stages that will be required to take your technology to market, and obviously those follow-on stages will need some funding. So it's useful to include what likely funding streams that are a good fit for your technology, and the plan to secure funding going forward. So that's everything from me. I'm going to hand over to Christoph. I'll stop sharing so Christoph can share, and I'm happy to take questions at the appropriate point. Thanks.
Thanks, Graeme. So just before I pass to Christoph, again, to emphasise, if you've got questions, if you pop them into the chat, then we will deal with those at the end. And if we run out of time, then we'll put those onto our frequently asked questions on the website as well. Now over to Christoph to talk about his journey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christoph Walti. I'm Professor of Bionanotechnology at the University of Leeds, and I'm here really today to give you a bit of an illustration of a possible journey and where POC funding would come in and at what stage it particularly would come in. So very briefly, we developed technology that out of my interest on developing diagnostic technology to combat the occurrence of antimicrobial resistance. This was a research project where we were all very keen to come up with a technology that can address this clinical need. The clinical need was very well defined. It was identified. There's a lot of evidence that in particular for an antibiotic called meropenem, there is a problem with prescription in the sense that everyone just gets a fixed dose that is not tailored to the patient. There is evidence that this is bad. Lots of people get too low a concentration. AMR develops. On the other side of the spectrum, many people get too much of the drug, and as a result of that, they get toxicity problems that will come with that. So, if meropenem concentrations could be measured in the patients, doctor could then adjust the dosing, and this concept is known as therapeutic drug monitoring. The problem comes now. This is not done in most countries in the world, and in particular, it's not done in the NHS. The reason why it's not done is because it's technologically not possible at the moment. If you want to do this, you need research-grade mass spec systems, which are expensive and difficult to operate and cannot be done in a standard hospital. This, in a way, is a curse, but it's also a blessing, and it's obvious why it's a blessing, because if we can do this, we will be in a unique position to have something that's really what we think is really valuable. Why it's a curse, I'll tell you in a minute. So just very briefly, what our journey. So we started this many years ago through lots of different research council funded research grants. We had MRC, EPSRC funding, had BBSRC funding. So we came up with a really good technology that delivered the sensitivity and the specificity and the time to result and the ease of use of all of it, of how to do this or how to measure meropenem in a patient, which could then potentially be used to adjust the dosing accordingly. The problem is that we as scientists are good at this. We think, yes, we have got this. We are close. We have a product. We can sell this, but that's far from the truth. There's a long way to go from here. And you can probably tell from the dates that this is a long journey and you have to be prepared for that. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered. And that's what I want to talk about really. So towards the clinical adoption and commercialization of this technology that we from the very outset thought, well, this is brilliant. We started discussions with our technology transfer team or commercialization team on sort of making them aware of that we have got something that we think has potentially got a use. There's a clear evidence clinical need for this, and Graeme was very keen to emphasize that you have to think about the clinical need, and you have to think about, can your technology address this clinical need? Is there evidence for this clinical need? So that box was ticked in this particular case relatively easily, because there is evidence that this is needed and would be helpful and would make a difference. We went to the NIHR to get funding for a validation of the technology. This is more technical development, where you have to validate this before it can go into the clinic. The NIHR is a different type of organization compared to proof of concept. While they are keen on commercialization, while they're keen on clinical translation, it is the clinical need that's at the top of their mind. So we had that was fine. We then discussed, as I said, with the commercialization office. It was clear that we need a commercial partner because we have no idea how to bring a product to market. So We managed to find someone, a company called MedTech to market, and the key is in their names. So they have got expertise in bringing medical technologies to market. They were interested in this technology that we had. They saw the value of this, and just to be absolutely clear, anything that we discussed with them was discussed under a non-disclosure agreement. So we didn't divulge any of our intellectual property secrets that we had at the time. But a lot of technologies, they are, as I said at the beginning, you're far from having a product when you sort of finish your research council funding, because a lot of the technologies that have been developed that look fantastic, they sort of fall at the maybe not the first, but certainly one of the early hurdles. When you take them out of your own hands and give them to someone else, and then they don't work, the reproducibility is bad, the sensitivity is not great, and it's a technical risk that is very often underestimated. So as a very first step, before doing anything else and really thinking that we should look for investment or anything, we wanted to prove that the technology is fit for purpose and can be taken out of our research lab and put in someone else's hands and can be reproduced. And also that the technology is feasible for mass manufacturing. So we applied for IAA. This is the university's own IAA fund, to demonstrate this with our commercial partner, that we gave them the technology, they looked at the manufacturing feasibility aspect, and only after that, when they confirmed, yes, we can take this, we can do something with this, it became a much more attractive proposition to our commercialization team and probably sort of investors down the line. Graeme also mentioned IP protection. That's where we very quickly identified that we might have a bit of a problem, because our IP was very narrow in the sense that we were interested in meropenem. That was our clinical need. That's what we were keen on. That's where we could see a clinical need. I'll just go to the next one. And I come back to the IP in a second. So we commissioned a proof of market analysis, a proof of market study, to look at how big is this market? Is there anything that, is this actually attractive to an investor? Because at the end of the day, you need a lot of investment to get a medical technology to market. And it turns out that, well, first of all, and that's where the curse came in, therapeutic drug monitoring for meropenem is not done. People don't do it, not because it's not a clinical need. It's just not done because there's no technical solution that is feasible to do this. So to have a commercial valuable proposition, our technology needs to be widened, and it cannot just be meropenem, because that will never be funded, because there is no return for the investors. So we identified that we have a weak-ish IP position because it's only demonstrated for meropenem, and this was one of our big risks that we identified, and maybe the biggest risk that Graeme identified, or Graeme said that we should address first. And then we went to the PBIA to ask them whether we can do this. But before we went there, we went through our checklist. And at this stage, we had a really robust technology. This was evidenced by the fact that we gave it to someone else and they could do it themselves to the same specification standards that we could do. We had solid evidenced understanding of the market. This is really important, because just us saying, oh, meropenem is a really good thing and it should be done, is a clinical need, is not good enough. It's really important that we understood what we needed, what the market was, and how a potential investor could make their money back from investing in our technology. We have a very good and solid understanding of how this could be commercialized, because we have done the feasibility studies. We had the support from our commercialization team. They were behind this, and we had an IP strategy developed. Yes, we found some risks, we found some holes, but that's what we then went to address in our POC, to look at how we can broaden our IP position. How can we make it stronger, such that it will eventually become a good and strong proposition that will be attractive to funders. So we have started this POC program. We have done what we wanted to do with this. We have broadened our technical remit in this. And we then went further because we had a plan. So we also were looking at commissioning a TPP to really understand the key technical details that are important when we make a product. We also, because we want to spin out this, we were looking for support for commercialization mentorship. So we had to go and get funding for that. And eventually, with the support from the PBIAA, we got our patent filed. And as you can see at the top of my slides, where it does sort of go from meropenem then to antibiotic therapeutic drug monitoring, eventually, through all these proof of market, proof of concept, proof of feasibility, it turns out that we only have a solid commercial proposition if we are not looking for meropenem, if we are not looking for antibiotics, but in fact for small molecule therapeutic drug monitoring. There is a much bigger market. The technology is perfectly suitable to do this. We just didn't think of this at the beginning because we were focused on meropenem. Clearly, you need a way forward. You need from the very outset, you need to think about what you're going to do. And that's what we have done with all these pots of funding that we eventually managed to get to look at our applicability, to look at a feasibility and how can we demonstrate this so we can take the risk out of our technology. And the last 3 points here are the future. We have now a clear plan of what is going to go into this spin out, how the spin out will be formed, who will need to be involved, what's going to come after that to do the clinical utility study to prove this. I think the key message before I hand back is that really make sure that you have the evidence, and I think that's this key here, the last 4 points, that you have the evidence that your technology is ready to go into proof of concept, that you're not doing research, but you have done your research and you have done collecting your evidence, and you have identified that big risk that you want to address, and move your technology forward and make a stronger proposition from that. And I will hand back to the chair.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christoph. That's been really, really useful and a great insight into the journey for that technology. We do have some hands up. We're going to take questions at the end, but if you want to pop them in the chat, then the speakers can have a look at them in advance. I'm going to pass straight over to Alison Jones now, who's going to present on her proof of concept project. Thanks, Al.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Alison Jones. I'm an Associate Professor of Computational Biomedical Engineering here at Leeds. I'm just going to test that I know how to make this progress properly. Go from there. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing some faces there. So my proof of concept project, hip sense precision verification of a sensor-based human motion detection. It is a collaboration between the University of Leeds and a local orthopedic device related company, Eventum Orthopedics, who are based in Leeds, and a surgical partner who is a senior surgeon at a centre that does a lot of hip replacement surgery and are also very involved in research. So I'll try to hit the highlights here and show any differences between maybe what I'm doing and what you've seen already. So the clinical need here is around the cup side of a hip replacement. So the socket of the ball and socket, and the alignment of that within the pelvis is has been shown to be related to various ways that hip replacements can fail. And it's actually quite difficult to achieve that alignment. So this is where the clinical need is. And the company, Eventum, are developing a device that will help to improve that using sensors on the body during surgery. And the way that is different to some of the competitors out there is that it's non-invasive. So it doesn't require loads of extra radiation imaging. It doesn't require extra things to be screwed into the bones. So that's their pitch there. And on the Eventum side, the background development is a lot of hardware development, as you'd expect, the specifications of those sensors and all of the requirements in terms of the hardware that's going to be taken into that surgical setting. And the less developed part of their process is on the software side. So actually doing the calculations required during the surgery to get those cup orientation predictions and to improve what the surgeon can do. So from our perspective at the university, we saw an opportunity here with this burgeoning interest in sensor-based tracking in general, and particularly for these kind of applications. Hang on a second, there we go. With a real increase in the amount that's being published in this area, that's over the last 10 years. And there being a real challenge here in terms of the various sources of uncertainty there are in a system like this, including, of course, the sensor errors themselves, but also the effects of the human skin and soft tissues moving around the sensors, variation between people, the way things are interpreted clinically. There's lots of potential sources of error here that need to be analysed and combined. And at the university, we've done a lot of work historically in this area, and we've got computational tools that we've developed. And so the potential to pull together a test bed that allowed us to really analyse those combinations of uncertainty and be able to accelerate the approval of the kind of product that Eventum are developing. Our background work is some of the stuff is illustrated here. So this has involved gathering population anatomical data about relevant structures, looking at how that socket side of the device moves around when people walk, and understanding that, connecting that together with computational tools, as well as relating that to the way that these devices can actually fail through replicating ISO standard testing in that model space as well. So we've got that capability of connecting all of those things together. Within the project itself, the steps that we're going through is gathering the data about that uncertainty, creating a new tool but pieced together with existing research, and including that idea of the clinical scenario that's happening in this particular case, and developing some benchtop testing. So there's IP and value coming out of this on the HipSense side. So this is where the company will own some pieces of IP, and really they're driving towards regulatory approval and demonstration that their device is going to do the job that they want it to. And then on our side at the university, we're developing the IP of this computational test bed and being able to demonstrate that it has really accelerated this development and demonstrated validity of the device in a real commercial case. So a couple of observations. First of all, lessons learned during the first 6 months. We're 6 months into this project. And the big theme here for me is really focused and short. So in comparison to running standard research projects, the reports that are required, the turnover of work packets, the need to stay focused really on the main outcomes and not get distracted by interesting things that come up. It has a very different feeling about it when you're actually running the project. And then in terms of thinking back to the application process and observations there, my main message here is really pretend it's going to start tomorrow in terms of doing this planning. Digging in a little bit there, I have, in this case, 2 different tracks of both background IP and foreground IP. That was brilliant in some ways because it allowed us to tick lots of value boxes in the application, but it also meant we had a lot to explain. So that's probably something to think about, like, focusing on the biggest value parts. The application does ask you to do a lot, as highlighted in terms of thinking about the IP, but having done that, it made the contracts at the beginning of the project much easier to do. So really there's loads of value in that, and that idea of pretend you're going to start tomorrow, I think comes in there. And pulling out in a slightly different way what Graeme said earlier, that achievable part of a SMART objectives, I think is maybe a little bit more focused here. and where there is risk, can you put a stop-go point in there to show what would happen if that risk turned out to not go so well? That's it from me. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Al. I'm going to pass over to Simone to field any questions.
Yeah, so we've got one question in the chat. This is for you, Christoph, but I think others on the panel may also have some comments here. But if I go to you, Christoph, first, how do you balance paper publication and IP protection during the years that you've been developing and translating your technology? And how do you make sure what you're publishing doesn't impinge on your IP and patents?
Yes, I'm afraid that's probably one of the most asked questions and the most pressing ones, because we as scientists understand the need for publishing. So the question states that we started in 2017, which is true, but obviously IP is not generated in 2017. There were a number of publications that came that were not compromising the IP position at all, that could be published. But yes, the key things, that the key invention, the key paper, couldn't be published before before the IP was protected, and this caused a bit of tension really in between the PhD students and the postdocs and the commercialization team. And to no one's fault really, because the commercialization team are fully aware that we can't publish this, and the postdocs and the PhD students want to publish it. So in terms of PhD thesis, that can be embargoed. So that's no problem. You can do the PhD thesis without any problems. Just make sure when it gets deposited that it's embargoed and will not be released into the public domain. So that's okay. My recommendation then will be to accept the fact that there is a commercial reason for not protecting your IP too early, as a result of that holding back your publication. And I accept that this is difficult, but I can assure you that I'm really, really glad that we didn't IP protect too early, because our IP is now so much stronger since we have added a lot of exemplifications to it before we went out and filed the IP. And I think realistically that if we hadn't done this, then our IP will be weaker, and our commercial proposition will be much weaker. And as a result of that, it will be much harder to find investment to take this forward. Two things is that you can write your publication, get you ready, make sure that it's all lined, it's all done and dusted by the time you file your IP, that you can then submit your publication. So, and also writing up the publication while you are thinking about the IP helps the IP attorney to get a better understanding of the technology. So, but yes, I'm afraid there's nowhere around. You have to hold back. There's absolutely no way you can publish and then protect the IP later on. Remember, you only have 20 years from your filing date, and that sounds a long time at this moment in time, but it's not. Medical technologies are an absolute nightmare to commercialize, and by the time you get to revenue, your 20 years might have shrunk quite considerably. So that's another consideration that you have to put in.
Could I just come in on something as well? I think, having been stung myself by trying to protect IP too early, and then, as Christoph says, that clock is then ticking away, and 20 years is not long, as it turns out. I suppose it's also, I mean, this is kind of a much bigger scale, but thinking even in terms of writing research projects about how you can have a sort of a balanced portfolio, perhaps for researchers, that some of the aspects that they're working on are publishable, because of course that's important for all of our research staff to be able to demonstrate outputs from their work. And so if there's aspects that can be published that are not a part of that patent, and then other aspects that that are going towards something that's going to be protected. It can make projects much more attractive to researchers, but ensure that the aspects that need to be protected can stay until it's the right time to put that patent in.
Well, thanks both. Graeme, did you have any comments on that particular question?
I think it's an eternal struggle for academics, but I think having a clear IP strategy and plan helps, because you know where the value is and where you want to protect. In the other areas, like Ruth said, allows you for publication. So it's also probably useful to have some sort of publication plan as well. So, and you can make sure that those two plans sort of jigsaw together nicely, so you're not causing trouble there.
Thank you. We have one other question in the chat, which is asking about clarification on end user co-development and how to implement that. Who would like to come in?
I could maybe come in first. I mean, I think you've seen two quite different examples actually with Christoph and Alison's projects today. So Christoph, the plan is to potentially spin out. So there's no direct or the industry partner is a kind of a partner which is more around kind of translating technologies to market. And Alison's, which is very much co-developed with the industry partner, using kind of a combination of the industry partner's IP and the university's IP to develop something that combines those two. So maybe two different examples there that perhaps helps to illustrate that there's more than one route, but absolutely sort of seeking the advice of the commercial sector in putting your proof of concept project together. I think regardless of the route you're going to go down, it is really essential. I'm not sure if Graeme wants to come in perhaps with some other examples or further comment.
I know it's very important to involve the patient's voice as well. So it's quite, often it's really useful to have some sort of patient involved for PPIE, and they can. And a lot of charity funding is absolute requirement for that. So, your follow-on funding, having those people involved in the project can often make it stronger and provide better access to that charity follow-on funding. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologise. It said end user. Yeah, so definitely the patients, but also the clinicians. I mean, if you're developing a device that's going to be used in surgery, for example, then it's absolutely essential that you're talking to those people that are going to be using that device.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, have the clinicians on board and providing you feedback and advice. Yeah.
Thanks both. Doesn't look like we've got any additional questions in the chat. And as we're a couple of minutes over, I think it's probably wise that we draw the session to a close. But if anybody does have any further questions from today, please feel free to drop us an email at pbiaa@leeds.ac.uk. I'll put that in the chat for everyone. It looks like, oh, yeah, we've got a thank you in the chat there. So I'll just put the email in the chat and then wish everyone a good afternoon and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.